Tilburg University and MindLabs present TAISIG Talks, the podcast that keeps you updated on the latest developments in the field of artificial intelligence in just 1 hour.
Welcome to this TAISIG podcast. TAISIG is the Tilburg Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group of Tilburg University. In this podcast, I try to give attention to AI developments, AI research, and AI education at Tilburg University. Normally, we give one or two researchers that are active at Tilburg University the floor here. My name is Pieter Spronck. I'm a professor of computer science at Tilburg University. And my guest today, Roy Lindelauf, I'll ask him to introduce himself, and Herwin Meerveld, who will also introduce himself. And the topic is AI for defense. Welcome. Roy, can you tell us who you are?
Yes, good morning, Pieter. Thank you very much for inviting us here. So my name is Roy Lindelauf. I've been working at the Defense Department for almost 30 years now. Started as an Apache aviator, but these days I'm a professor of data science and military operations at the Netherlands Defense Academy. And I also have an endowed chair in Tilburg University on data science, safety and security. And I also lead the Data Science Center of Excellence of the Dutch Department of Defense. And so we do a lot of research on AI and data science for defense and security.
Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about that. Herwin.
Good morning. Also, thanks for the invite. I'm Herwin Meerveld. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Royal Netherlands Air and Space Force. And currently, I'm coordinating the Data Science Center of Excellence that was just mentioned by Roy. And I'm also conducting a PhD research as an external PhD researcher at Tilburg University.
Okay, thank you. Well, might surprise some people. I know this podcast is mostly listened to by people of Tilburg University. I don't think that many people at Tilburg University know that we collaborate with defense. And they might not even realize that collaboration with defense is fairly common for most universities in the Netherlands, also for Tilburg. So, can you tell us a bit about what is the reason for universities to collaborate with defense? What are the kind of things that we do, and why is it beneficial for both defense and for universities to do these things? So, Roy, can I ask you to open up on that?
Sure. So I think one of the prime reasons why our defense department is collaborating, in this case with Tilburg University, and more in general with universities across the country, but also internationally, is that with respect to AI, we find it very important that we collaborate in ecosystems, because AI is developing very fast outside the walls of government. And so we need to find a collaboration. So that's one of the reasons why we collaborate with universities, but also with industry. And we do this in an ecosystem where we bind these things together. And specifically about Tilburg University, I think the mission and the vision of Tilburg University is to understand society. And with respect to AI, it's human-centered focus on AI. So understanding AI with the lens of human agency on what it means for society. So that is, I think, what Tilburg University brings uniquely to the table with respect, for instance, to technical universities. And especially if you're talking about the use of AI in the defense domain, this is really important, because in the defense domain, you conduct military operations, and AI can be integrated into that, but it has a lot of effect on our society, but also on the humans conducting these operations. And we really need to understand what that means. And that's why we have this nice collaboration.
Okay. You want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. As Roy said, defense is part of society, and defense is part of the political environment. So universities work with all kinds of departments that are part of the government, as they do and will do with the Ministry of Defense. But you can also reverse this or turn this around as why universities work with defense is also because defense cannot do it on its own. So there's a need for the defense to work with universities.
Yeah. So before we get into what kind of research is happening and what we do with AI, I can imagine that quite a few people will scratch their heads a bit when they hear university collaborates with defense, and they, especially in the area of AI, they immediately imagine, let's say, fully autonomous drones that can attack, and they feel a bit queasy about thinking that their university is actually collaborating with these kinds of applications. So can you be open about what is happening and how we should think about this?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I would like to say is that I understand this viewpoint, but I think it needs more nuance. Because if you understand the nuance, then things become more clear. And what I mean with that is that, yes, of course, the defense departments are looking at AI and how to integrate it into operations because it brings a lot of benefits. But we also know that it can bring a lot of risks. And that's why we want to do this in a responsible manner. And one of the ways to do it in a responsible manner is to really understand the technology and what it implies. And you can only understand this technology if you do the research, if you collaborate with universities like with Tilburg. And then you find out how to do this in a responsible manner. So explainability of AI, making things transparent, etc., etc. Those are all things that we are actively researching, and we need Tilburg for that. And we also need the academic critical attitude towards technology to really think through all the difficult questions that you encounter when deploying something like this. So my point is, well, if you think about it, it's a very good thing that we are collaborating with the university, and the university should also be happy with this because they can contribute to this, doing it in a responsible way. And we can give a lot of examples of this, but I think this is the main takeaway. Defense departments, and especially in the Netherlands, we are very professional, and we want to conduct the things that we do in a responsible manner. And yes, of course, a military operation has certain characteristics that nobody likes, but that's in essence what military operations are about. But we want to do it as professionally and as responsibly as possible. That's why we need this research together with the university.
Yeah, indeed. And one thing to add is that we hear these kinds of questions very often, of course. And on the one hand, this is narrowing the debate on AI in the military. So it's not only about killer robots or autonomous weapon systems. It's basically framing that this debate is suffering from. Because military decision making is a lot more than the use of force in itself in the end. So you have logistics, you have intelligence gathering, and so on and so on. So I think we need to be careful to frame or to narrow the debate being about killer robots, etc. Because then we cannot have a nuanced conversation about this matter. And you asked us, can you be open about this? I think, again, we need to be open about this as a Ministry of Defense because, to inform this debate about being way more broader than the narrow frame that we hear a lot.
Yeah, maybe if I can add to that. So I totally agree with what Herwin is saying about the framing of this problem. And actually, sometimes I'm really annoyed by the fact that this is framed in this manner, because this creates a certain public perception, which then again creates policymakers and other individuals doing certain things that are not needed. So the frame of the killer robot, the autonomous system, that does everything on itself because of AI, it simply is not true. And as you know, Pieter, because you're also an AI researcher, AI is so much more nuanced than that. It's not as black as white as it is stated.
Yeah. It seems to me when you talk about responsibility and artificial intelligence and defense, then probably the most irresponsible application that you can think of is a killer robot that or actually any system that autonomously takes decisions and acts. Would you agree with that?
Well, I at least agree with that. Such examples are very concerning, and that we need to really discuss what those applications would imply. But I think the most irresponsible approach to this is, because of those examples could exist in the future, is not investing in the development of AI within defense at all.
Yeah, so my personal impression is that there is there's an attitude in among many people in the world, and especially among the high tech developers, the big AI companies, that AI can do so many things autonomously, and that we just should give AI free rein. While the reason that I say it's irresponsible is because I don't believe that we are there yet, and I think it will be a long way away before we can actually reliably let AI take autonomous decisions, especially decisions which contain a lot of risk, like which you have in defense probably.
Yeah, so I have two reactions to that. So I agree. The first thing is, where do we use autonomous systems really depends on the context. So you cannot say this is a black and white decision. So there might be context where you want to have autonomous systems. And we have examples of this, like we have Navy ships that have missile defense systems on the ship. And you want these systems in a certain context, so in an area of operation where there are active hostilities. You want the system to operate autonomously, because if the ship is attacked with missiles, then you need a very fast defense. And a human in that loop is always too slow. So their autonomy is really needed, and actually it helps to defend the ship. If the ship is in the harbor, it's a different question. You just turn the systems out. So I think that's the first thing. It really depends on the context that you're talking about. And I had a second point that I forgot, so maybe I'll get back to it.
Well, if I may add,
Yeah.
I think, again, we need nuance in this conversation, of these kinds of conversations, because talking about AI and autonomy in weapon system, first of all, again, narrows that debate on weapon systems, while there are way more type of systems and decision making in the military domain. So it's not only about weapon systems, but even then, talking about AI and autonomy in weapon systems doesn't make clear what level of autonomy we're talking about for which specific function in such system. So it's a navigation function or a targeting function, a multi-criteria optimization process, and so on and so on. And which level of autonomy by which kind of AI and method is used. And only if we're going to those specifics, then we can have a fruitful conversation about what is responsible then in a, as Roy said, in a specific context. So are we talking about a war context or a peacetime environment or the gray zone? Are we talking about the air operations as one of the operational domains within the military, or the space domain, the cyber domain, the land domain, the maritime domain? It all differs. And are we talking about offensive operations or defensive operations? Are we talking about, as we call, kinetic operations, so basically the actual use of force, or non-kinetic operations? I sum this up to make clear that talking about a specific context is there are very diverse contexts in the military domain.
Yeah. So in general, if we have a broad conclusion here, that would be, if talking about AI and defense is talking about an enormously wide area, which you have to carve up and say, well, what does responsibility mean in each of these areas? And the focus on, let's say, what people sometimes see in movies, that's just a very tiny bit of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so if I may, so now I remember the second point I wanted to make. That was about the big tech companies that you rightfully mentioned. And Herwin and I, we wrote a piece for War on the Rocks, which is a quite well-known journal in our field, where we argued that we also see the big tech companies pushing their technology, often very sophisticated, very nice looking, very, it promises a lot with nice YouTube videos that everybody likes. They are like Hollywood movies. And then they sketch a problem of the world that's going, to pieces, and then they have the solution for that problem. So we also observe that. And we see the push towards defense organizations. And our point in that piece, among others, is that we really have to be careful about this and think about this. We're not saying you should not use big tech, but what we're saying is really think about if you're going, to work with such a big tech company, think about the strategic lock-in that you might encounter. Think about the data, what is happening with that? What about your data sovereignty? What about once you're working with them, then you probably need to have updates, etc., etc. But we don't have to talk about the geopolitical situation that has arisen, and this makes this even a more pressing point. So you really have to think about this. And also our policymakers have to understand that what these big tech companies are selling, that we have to be able to look under the hood what they are doing. We need to understand if they are deploying AI algorithms, what these algorithms are actually doing and what they aren't doing. We need to understand what is happening with the data. That's why we need to do this research together with universities, so we can, really understand this problem and make a good decision on and find the right balance on cooperating with such companies. So that again is a reason to do it in a responsible way. We need to collaborate with universities like Tilburg to understand what these big tech companies try to sell us.
And if I may add another thing, is to come back on the point raised before, that people feel uncomfortable about AI and data science in broader terms within the military or in the defense context. But I think that's, apart from that Hollywood perspective, so to speak, is also caused by the feelings they have with military operations, as Roy said. But defense is part of our society and will become an even greater part of our society, or a more visible part, I would say. So we have to deal with that, but we need to be careful about projecting our uncomfortable feeling on military operations itself towards AI in the military. And I think yesterday we probably heard the Prime Minister of Canada talking about, in a other context, to be clear, but about value-based realism and being principled and pragmatic. That also applies to AI in defense. I think it is pragmatic and realistic about having the need to invest in this kind of technology, while still addressing the need for principles and responsible AI in this case.
Okay. So we talked very broadly now, and I can imagine that people that now are wondering, what are you doing actually? And what is Tilburg University doing? And I assume that you can't talk about everything that you're doing. Although when we talked earlier, you said, well, we can talk about 99% of what we're doing. So maybe we should delve a little bit in that people, that it starts to live for people what is actually being done here.
Yeah.
And you've been working here for now 2 years or something like that?
2.5 years. Yeah.
So some work has been done. I know we've been planning this podcast for a long time.
No, we're really happy that finally it's happening. So we have a lot of different kinds of research projects going on. So I'll just mention one or two, and then Herwin can maybe add to that. So one of the bigger projects that we are doing, which is actually led by Marie Posma, she's also a professor in Tilburg, but we have this very close collaboration. It's called Steadfast. And this is a project about drone swarm technology, so developing drone swarms, smaller drones, for several use cases. And one of the use cases is the intelligence gathering. So you use a swarm to send into the field and to obtain information and to increase your situational awareness. So, and of course, there are a lot of different aspects to a problem like this. So one of the things that we're doing is using data science and AI to learn how this swarm should cooperate, where to search, how to divide the various tasks that they have to do. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. But we're also looking at computer vision, for instance. So these drones, of course, have cameras and they can look at certain things. They have to detect objects. They have to classify these objects. And of course, computer vision is a very big field within the AI domain. And a lot of people are doing things in this area, but we find it really important to understand this object detection, but also the explainability. So if a drone or a swarm of drones finds something, so they recognize a certain vehicle in the field, it's not sufficient for us that it says, well, here is vehicle X. We want to have this swarm to explain to the operator, this is why we think that this is vehicle X. So, and this is one of the things on how to do this in a responsible way. So we have one PhD researcher, and she's looking, this is the problem that she is looking at. So she's looking at all different kinds of object detection models that there are, explainability metrics, etc., and mapping the pros and cons of this, just to delve into one of those aspects. Other aspects of the Steadfast program, for instance, are not only on the AI side, but also the ethical side and the societal side. So we also have work packages that focus on, okay, if you are going to use something like this, what does this mean for society? What does this mean for the organization that is using such a system, etc., etc.? So that's another way of looking at it from an ethical lens. And the other use case that we have for Steadfast is a first responder scenario. So that's a civilian use case where you have a mass casualty event with a lot of casualties, and then you can use a drone swarm to do triage. So to find the victims, to triage them. So which one are already deceased, which one need a certain kind of help, to find evacuation routes, etc. So that's a high level on what we're doing in this project. And then we have a lot of different streams of actually AI research to help to build this system and build it together. One of the things that we are seeing is that drone swarms and drone swarm technology is actually very sophisticated. It's very difficult. And if you look at the AI research, it has not been solved yet, even though if you look at like what we mentioned earlier, the big tech companies with their nice movies, and it looks like everything is working fantastically. But if you're actually doing the research, we find that it's much more difficult. And that's the nice thing about, doing the research and seeing what's really out there. This is just one of the examples, and I know Herwin can also give a lot of examples.
Yeah, so in more broader terms, we have projects on decision support systems. The responsible AI already talked about that. Autonomous or at least unmanned systems with a level of autonomy, but also countering those. So, for example, we did a project with the municipality and the police of The Hague and Northwestern University in Chicago, addressing the problem that if an enemy would use a swarm of drones, can we classify within the set of drones that are flying around in a city like The Hague at a regular day, so to speak? Can we not only detect the drones because that's a detection problem, but can we also classify which drones are having are posing a higher threat than other drones? That's a very hard problem, and I think that problem needs to be addressed in research at this moment, because somewhere in the upcoming years, we can imagine that some actors, could also be a non-state actor like a terrorist group, will use this kind of technologies because it's cheap and people can develop it basically on their own. So how do you defend yourself against those kinds of threats? So that's an example of countering drones, and but we also have projects within the cyber domain, for example. You can imagine also within the it's not part of the Steadfast project, but if you think about such a technology with unmanned systems with a high level of autonomy in a given scenario, that you also need cyber agents that can do cybersecurity with a high level of autonomy because there is no human at that tactical edge. Let me name just one other domain is disinformation. So it's the online environment, operations through the cyber domain, which is a pressing issue these days. And how can we detect disinformation in a fast and accurate manner, for example? So we have multiple projects within that theme, so to speak.
Maybe to add, so you can think of a lot of technical platforms that we're looking at, and how to use AI to make them operate more efficiently. Another thing that we are also doing, which actually is a long line of research that we have been doing for some time, is looking at social groups, and in this specific instance at terrorist groups, and how you can use machine learning to learn something about their behavior. So we recently, last year, published a book about this that looks at JNIM, and JNIM is a organization that consists of Al-Qaeda and IS in Western Africa. And as most people might know, that the last couple of years we have seen a lot of coups in Africa, so a lot of countries are going the wrong way. And these irregular and terrorist organizations are taking advantage of that. So we built a model again with American colleagues on using machine learning. We gathered a lot of open source academic data. There's a lot of open source data about these kind of groups for 10 years. And we analyzed these data sets with machine learning techniques. And what we do, then we filter out rules according to which the machine thinks that this group is behaving by looking at the data. So these are correlations, and they say something like condition 1 is true and condition 2 is true. Then there is a certain probability and some other metrics that the group will do this. So you can think of if the borders are closed and if the group is receiving financial support from a diaspora, then there is a high probability that they will conduct attacks on civil security installations within the coming 3 months. And again, these rules the computer can infer. They are correlations. And this is what we also do a lot of education within the DoD, where sometimes these kinds of models might be used. We teach them that these kind of rules, they are not the truth. You have to educate people about AI and what it's doing. So we say these are correlations, and at best they might help you with something. But an intelligence analyst that is actually looking at these groups and maybe has been looking at these groups for 10 years, he might find such a tool useful in the sense that he gets the top 10 rules and then he thinks, well, this rule, this looks interesting, but I already know this. Or he might say, this is totally nonsense because I have been looking at this group for such a long time, it doesn't make any sense. Or he might say, this is quite interesting, we never thought about this, let's delve into this deeper. So in here you see that the human-machine teaming, and that's about all these projects, of course, are about human-machine teaming because humans still need to be in and on the loop, depending on the context, which we discussed earlier. And I think that's another aspect that we are not totally addressing in our research, but that is being addressed in other research lines, is how do you organize these kinds of new technologies, these AI technologies? How do you organize this in your organization to use them effectively, efficiently, but also responsibly? So what kind of processes do you need in a sense that AI can really help you, can support the humans that are doing the operations? I think we have seen examples in history that this hasn't been used optimally, but this is an organizational problem. And we also should think about that. And we are thinking about that, and I know that there are also researchers in Tilburg University that are looking at this.
Yeah. So you mentioned again a whole lot of applications. Might be interesting to delve into one or two of them a little bit deeper, because what we now get the impression is that it's very broad. We're not talking about research that the two of you are doing, but that many people are doing. One thing that I also noticed about the things that you mentioned, when people talk about AI nowadays, half the people would think only about large language models because that is what AI is in the media mostly. But most of the things that you mentioned have nothing to do with large language models. Although underneath the large language models, I know the technology there is also technology that's used for data science, for instance. But Herwin, I know you're a PhD student. I don't know. So the project that you're working on, you have probably one topic. Maybe you want to delve a little bit into that, what you're doing and what you found, etc.
Sure. And that is actually about using large language
Yeah,
models.
you
So,
told me.
well, we started about the question how we can leverage data science. So not scope to large language models at that moment. How we can leverage data science for the military strategic level. So in military decision making, we define 3 levels of war, as we call them. The tactical level, that's basically the battlefield level. The operational level is translating strategic goals into tactical missions, in short. And the strategic level is the military strategic level is adjacent to the political strategic level. So it's translating political objectives into military objectives. And we found that in literature across the globe, the operational and strategic level is basically understudied in the within the scope of data science in the military decision making. And on top of that, the literature that is addressing that strategic level has a predominant focus on the risks of data science within the military context, where at the research at the tactical level is predominantly focused at the opportunities. And we can explain that by in terms that at the tactical level, problems can be made way more specific, for example, and you have specific data sets, etc., and then you can think of solutions. But as I said, I think it's irresponsible not to look at the opportunities without neglecting the risks. So that's the rationale behind the project. So let's look at how data science can be leveraged at that strategic level. But that's still very broad. So we had to scope that. And we scoped that to wargaming specifically. Wargaming is a methodology or a method to gain insights of human decision making, and you can use it for training purposes, education, but also in decision making itself. It can be used to simulate your environment, to stress test your plans, etc. And it's a method often used in military decision making, also at the strategic level, and it allows us to look at decision making as a whole through the lens of that simulation, and so we scope down military strategic decision making to the wargaming phase or method, and data science we have scoped down to the use of large language models. And in the first phase of this project, we have taken a look at the question whether large language models can generate useful text at all in that wargaming context. So what we see is that industry parties and also governments are, well, I would say, playing around with large language models and develop tools that can be used in that military decision making without rigorous academic research on what's actually the quality. Apart from, does it look nice? Does it feel like it's doing something good? Can we measure how good those products, those text products are? So that's the first.
Can I enter for more? Because you say I use large language models, but they produce text on what?
Well, in this project, again, we looked at the wargaming. So in the wargaming is not only playing a game. There's a wargaming life cycle. So you start with an idea and the development of a scenario, which kinds of players. So, for example, at a strategic level, you can imagine that NATO itself is a player in such a wargame, and Russia is another player, but you could also think of war games with non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross or whatsoever. And you draft a scenario in which you put all the relevant players relevant for your decision making at hand. So in that wargaming life cycle, so drafting a scenario is in the development phase, and then you have the execution phase where players actually make up actions that they intend to do. And there's an adjudicator. That's the term for a referee, basically, in that game that decides with specific methods. There are very diverse methods for that, which action succeeds or with a certain probability. And you have an analysis phase after you have executed that war game. So in all those phases, there are all kinds of tasks that you need to do. And for each of those tasks, you can assess whether you could use a large language model for that. So what we did specifically then in our project is let large language models draft a scenario. Another task is let large language models draft a player briefing. So that's a briefing for each of the players on what their objectives are, how they might want to achieve those, what their capabilities are, etc. Drafting a narrative for that adjudicator, so that referee. And the last task was, basically the first task in designing the idea of the war game. So what do we want to achieve with this war game? That's a task in the design phase of that life cycle. And in wargaming literature, there are all kinds of aspects that come at the fore, which are essential in wargaming products. So it needs to be comprehensive, for example, but also the fidelity of the text needs to be there needs to be a high fidelity to actually draw in people into that game, and it relates closely to the aspect of immersion. So one of the characteristics of wargaming, why it works, is people become immersed in a scenario, and they try to actually imagine that they are in a specific situation. So all those variables essentially contribute to the concept of effectiveness. And what we did is we asked wargaming experts worldwide to assess texts on those variables without knowing whether it was a human-created text or a large language model generated text. And it turned out that the large language model, for at least for the tasks we selected that I just mentioned, was indeed able to match human quality, or for some tasks even surpass that human quality. So it's that opened up opportunities to dive into this deeper.
Let me ask you a question here that, well, as somebody who knows a bit about AI, would wonder about. So what you get out of a large language model is what was put into it, so what it was trained on. So it depends on the large language model that you use, and I assume that it was also trained on these military text. But if it's a fairly general large language model, it will also be trained on text on commercial computer games. And there have been tests in the past where there were comparisons made between actual military operations and military operations in computer games, and there was a large difference. So I would be fearful that what you get out of a large language model is something that would work in a computer game, but not really in the real world.
That's a valid question. What we actually use is ChatGPT, so a commercial model, not specifically trained for this task, but we provided contextual information via retrieval augmented generation. And it was basically an exploratory study to explore whether even a commercially developed model could generate useful text in this context, on which we can assume that if you would train a model specifically for this task, that it may be even better. So indeed, we used that commercial model. And another relevant aspect, I think, to this question is the next phase in our research, where we actually gonna look at if a model is used for the generation of a course of action. So it's basically a decision support to a player within the execution phase of that war game, suggesting what that player can do. You assume that such a model needs to retrieve all kinds of information from all kinds of data sets that are relevant to that task, indeed. And then we come to the question, okay, can we provide the user, the decision maker within that war game, can we provide it an explanation on what kind of documents were actually retrieved and how did those documents or parts of the documents, the chunks, etc., how did they actually influence the output of the model, so the suggested course of action? And then we come back to the topic of explainable AI. So this is how we approach this. And okay, let's take a look at whether we can use a technology like this in a military for a military task, in a military situation, and then how can we deploy or first develop it effectively and responsibly.
Okay.
Yeah, so I see you looking at me. So of course, I have a lot of examples, but maybe let me, if that's your question, Roy, can you also give an example?
Well, I was thinking that, so we delved
Sure.
into one of the examples of Herwin, so maybe...
Sure. So one of the things that comes to mind that maybe is nice to mention is we already mentioned the drone stuff that we're doing. So one of the projects, and actually we have multiple projects on this, is that you have drones that are looking for other drones. So you have we call this a hide and seek problem. So you maybe have one or two or more seeker drones that are looking for drones that are trying to hide. And then the situation is that the way we model it is that you have like a certain map with locations, and you can look for the hider drone in each location. But depending on the location, there is a certain probability that a drone that is searching there will be destroyed. So maybe in some sense it will be destroyed. So given the setting, the question becomes, what is a good way to search these locations given that I have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, n number of drones? And this is of course a game theoretical problem in some sense, and in AI they often approach these problems using reinforcement learning. So we did some initial projects on this problem using reinforcement learning and found some optimal policies. But one of the things that we found, and this is also quite well known from reinforcement learning, that it's not very robust. So if you change the setting a little bit, if you change the adversary a little bit, then the policies that you learned, actually they collapse and they are quite useless, I would say. That's why we now reverse to game theory, which, well, technically you can argue about this, whether it's a strand of AI or not, but I mean, these things are quite closely related. So what we're doing with the game theory, there are a lot of different kinds of games, and there is one game that is really close to the setting that I just mentioned, which was developed by Tom Lidbetter. It's called a search and rescue game. And he actually solved this game, so he found the Nash equilibrium, so he found optimal strategies for both players, but only in the sense that you have one searcher and one hider. But in the setting that we are talking about, a drone swarm always consists of 2 or more drones. So we were thinking, okay, now we can start from Tom Lidbetter's work. We know the results that he has, but what will happen now if we have more drones? So that's a project that we are doing now, and it's very difficult to find the optimal solutions for this setting, but we are now using different kind of techniques and also AI techniques to find approximate strategies, approximate solutions that can help. And then when you delve into this, then you find all kinds of complexity, because you can ask yourself, okay, if I'm doing this, so if I allow these 5 drones to search for this hider, it really depends if these drones can communicate with each other or not. So if one drone, for instance, is looking somewhere, it's at a certain location, but then it doesn't find the hider, then it doesn't make sense for the other drones to also go look in that area later on if you assume that the hider is static, because there was already a search there. But you can only transfer this information if the drones can communicate. So then you get a setting, okay, can the drones communicate or not? Depending on that setting, you have to find the optimal solution. And if drones can communicate, in what sense can they communicate? Around what radius? So you find all these different kind of complexities. And what we are doing is we're trying to find approximate optimal strategies in these settings. And so that's difficult. So that's what I mentioned in the beginning, drone swarm technology. It's really difficult to do this right. So that's one thing. And the other thing that we're also looking at in this regard is we are comparing it to how good humans are doing this. So we now have a PhD researcher who is setting up experiments. We already did some initial experiments where you have humans that have to deploy these drone swarms looking for other drones. And we have the drones themselves doing this autonomously. And then we compare the results. So how good are the humans doing it? And how good are the drones doing it by themselves? And is there a certain point at which, the information and the cognitive load to the operator becomes so large that it's very, very difficult to do this in a good way only with humans? And again, this is about the responsible aspect of this. So we need to find these trade-offs and these, we have to be able to get this above the table to see, well, at a certain point we can find that doing this autonomously by drones is actually better than if humans would do this. And if you know that is information that can help you in deploying drone swarms, for instance.
But I'm not surprised that for a task of this complexity, but this possibility for analysis, that humans can't do this.
Exactly. So that's why we also, but it's still an assumption, right? So you have to do the research to figure out.
Well, but it depends on the humans. Maybe there are certain humans it depends on the human experience and their intelligence, etc.
Depends on the interface. Depends on so many things.
Yeah.
But we really want to understand this, right?
Yeah, but I've seen that in so it's nice that it's an example that really appeals to me personally, because I do a lot in game AI research, and this is game AI research. But you also see that in games, humans tend to collapse to certain strategies which they found in the past they work, and then they use that strategy, and then the strategy doesn't work anymore, and they adapt the strategy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really have such a complex situation that changes, then maybe you should do completely new analysis, and that's something that humans are not very good at.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because this is the way humans do this, but that's also because we cannot find the optimal strategies mathematically because it's too complex. There are a lot of solutions to finding approximate strategies. And one of those things, so that a system can do, is what's called fictitious play, where you actually do this, what you're saying, right? So you start off at some point, then you do an epsilon variation, and then you see if that improves, and you keep on doing that depending on what your opponent is doing. And then you learn an approximate optimal strategy. But it might not be optimal. You might be doing some, moving into a certain direction that becomes suboptimal. That's what you're saying. Well, if you take a step back and start over, then you find another path to a solution that's more optimal. So machines are also doing this in a certain sense. And I think it's really important also to bring the game theory stuff closer to the, especially in this field, the reinforcement learning work, because of robustness. That's one of the things that we are learning, that's really advantage.
So one other topic that you mentioned in passing that you might want to say a little bit more about, if you have the experience there, is disinformation, which I think is something that is very prominent in today's society, and something that's very important in all kinds of contexts. So maybe as a third topic that we can say a bit about that, can you discuss disinformation a bit?
Yeah, so maybe I can start, and then Herwin can take off the project, the bigger projects that we are doing. So we have one PhD student, Timo Weslake, actually, who is looking at this really from an AI perspective. So one of the questions that he asked himself. So first, of course, you have this. There are already a lot of algorithms that can, try to classify certain pieces of information. So say tweets on whether it's true or false. But one of the things that he did was to do analysis not on the binary classification problem, but if you have a multi-class, so you don't only have this is true or false, but you have a lot of classes in between. So there's a lot of variety there. He gathered a data set with, I think it was 9 classes or something like that. And then he also tried to do this classification problem on this. So using certain techniques, and that was quite successful, I would say. And the other thing that he's now doing, which I also think is a really interesting project, is that if you have a certain piece of information, it can be a tweet or it can be certain text or maybe multimodal also, like with a picture with a text or something like that. And then he is using actually agentic AI, so he's using LLMs to see if he can, say something about this text, and not whether it's true or false, but whether is it of a deceptive nature or is it of a certain kind of other nature. So he built his own ontology, which we are now validating. So that's the thing with these LLMs, they can do really strange things. So you really have to do a good validation on these kinds of things. So the first thing that he's doing right now is validating the ontology, but he already built a system based on this ontology to do this, I would say, classification of these messages on the nature of his deceptiveness, etc. The next thing he wants to do is to do the experiment with humans to also validate, how good the system actually is. And I think this again relates to the responsible use of these kinds of systems, because Herwin already mentioned, we see a lot of use and deployment of LLMs and agentic AI also in defense organizations. And I think we should be really critical about that. So for each context, we should do the validation. Is this really working the way we think it is working? Because they look very nice, the outputs, it all feels and appears very good and useful, etc. But we have to do the validation before we can really deploy a system like that. So that's just one of the topics that we have one PhD researcher working on. And Herwin, maybe you can say something about the stuff we're doing with Justice for Prosperity.
Yeah, indeed. So first of all, disinformation itself may appear to some people as not primarily a defense problem or a Ministry of Defense issue, which can be true. It's a societal problem in broader terms. But what we've learned is that analyzing disinformation campaigns, from that it turns out that there are all kinds of players and categories of players, influencers, micro-influencers, etc., far right or extremist organizations, which are actually financed and backed by governments or people, oligarchs, very close to certain governments. So disinformation itself can be part of cognitive warfare. Then it's actually a military issue. But disinformation also leads to polarization, or may lead to polarization, and that's the societal issue we're hearing a lot these days, of course. And polarization itself may cause destabilization of society, and that can be or is of national interest to governments. So therefore, just want to mention this, why this theme is important for defenses. What we do, for example, with Justice for Prosperity, as Roy mentioned, it's a not-for-profit organization, a Dutch organization, trying to raise this issue of disinformation to speak for the minorities in all kinds of minorities in society. Together with Tilburg University, is mapping that disinformation campaign. So which actors are actually active in those campaigns, so that we can understand how a narrative evolves and is spread online. But another project that we are about to start with, together with Just for Prosperity and Fontis and Breda University of Applied Sciences and Mind Labs, is to train journalists with the knowledge on that disinformation campaigns and how narratives evolve, etc. Using wargaming again for journalist decision makers to train them how to deal with this. Because you can imagine that for journalists and media partners, talking and retweeting, reposting, etc. About a piece of disinformation may also contribute to the disinformation campaign itself, even if you're debunking that. So how do you deal with that, and what are the policies? And that's not our expertise. That's a journalist expertise. What are their implied policies and rules, or explicit, on how to deal with this kind of stuff? So it's an interesting collaboration between all kinds of disciplines coming together, collaborating also on the specific expertise they bring in.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm not surprised anymore that we have to increase our funding for defense. There's so many topics that belong to this. Suppose people, I don't know, so this is scientific research that's published, so people could read up on that. Is it also maybe presented somewhere? Do you do something for the wider public on this?
Yeah, so I think we do like podcasts like this. So we try to be involved, and that's also one of our mission statements. So one of the things that we have to do actually is to open up the ecosystem, to show what we are doing, to talk about it in all kinds of different fora. So we try to do interviews, we talk to policymakers, we give courses at all kind of different levels. But we are also involved in the policy discussion on this on a global level. So the Netherlands started the Responsible AI in the Military Domain Summit in 2023, which is a worldwide global summit. It was first organized in The Hague. More than 160 countries were there to talk about AI in the military and how to do it responsibly. Last year we were in South Korea, and this year we will be, actually in 2 weeks, we will be in Spain to talk about this at the highest level and to inform our policymakers worldwide on how to do it. So we try to speak at all different levels, from a bachelor student all the way to a Secretary of Defense and beyond. And I think that's also one of the things that we need to do, to educate the public. But you can only educate the public if you understand the research in depth. So that's again how these things tie together.
Okay. Thank you. Is anything any of you want to add?
Well, to stress again, we're very open about this kinds of topics for several reasons. First of all, about what we spoke about is broadening the debate about AI and within defense, or avoid the narrowing of the debate actually. So a lot of what we do is not that scary or whatsoever. So we can talk about mostly all of that research.
And it's also published, right?
and it's
just
published
in journals. So that's.
And another reason is, and that's one of the reasons why we are also participating in Mind Labs, an open ecosystem, is because of the fact that AI is a dual-use technology, and developments go way faster outside the government than within the government on this technology. So there's also a win for us, basically to be open and to collaborate with all kinds of parties outside the government, because that's where the critical knowledge is built. And what we bring is, apart from the knowledge on the technology, is the domain knowledge, which is critical in data science. And in our case, the domain knowledge is the military operation.
Anything from you?
No further. So I'm really happy about the opportunity to be here, Pieter. So we are thoroughly enjoying our collaboration with Tilburg University, and that's really true. The Mind Labs ecosystem is fantastic. I think the universities are also very collaborative, and sometimes we also get the pushback from certain elements within the university, and I think that's good. I think we need that, and It sharpens us, but we are also open for an open, constructive, collaborative discussion on this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe we can in time get back to this particular topic. Hopefully, because some of these PhD students finish their work and not because things happen in the world that require us to get back to this. But we'll see in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.